And I think it's kind of ironic that as much as they like to talk about foreign or American influences on the environmental end, as you pointed out, they're essentially using an American form of politics that comes out of the United States, using these really simple singular terms. Like I listened to Catherine Marshall, who's a spokesperson for Ethical Oil, and I don't know how many times I had to hear her say foreign money, puppet, radical, and then when she talked about herself, they were Canadian owned. So even the question of whether Enbridge gives money to Ethical Oil doesn't matter because they're Canadian, 100% Canadian owned and funded, which is kind of, if you ask me, she basically answered that Enbridge probably does give them money. But
can we go to a clip of that right now, Mike, just to give an example of what you're talking about?
Sure.
Okay, here we go. We do have this conversation between Catherine Marshall of Ethical Oil, John Bennett of the Sierra Club, and Evan Solomon on Power and Politics. And it is incredible, just like you said, Mike, how forcefully Catherine Marshall resisted the idea, or resisted answering the question of do oil companies fund the lobby group Ethical Oil? And here we go with that clip. It's very interesting to hear. It's like absolute belligerence on the part of the woman, the spokesperson from Ethical Oil, who at one point even has to hide behind the fact that she apparently is a student. Here we go.
Why do you think the oil companies, which are foreign-owned and foreign investment, they should be allowed to have their say, and groups, Canadian groups, some of which may have foreign money, why shouldn't they? I don't understand. If the oil companies can do it, why can't the environmental groups?
It's a good question. Look, the companies operating in the oil sands, they pay Canadian taxes, they employ thousands of Canadians coast to coast, they're a critical part of our economy. This is about foreign interests and their puppet groups who have no stake in Canada's economy or in our decision. They're trying to manipulate and interfere in a Canadian process, and that's wrong. We shouldn't allow them to hijack a Canadian federal regulatory process. It should be Canadian voices and concerns.
Okay, here
it is what's happening. It is.
It's not
what's
at all.
happening.
Okay.
It is.
Nobody tells the Sierra Club of Canada what to do or what to say except the members of the Sierra Club.
I'm going to ask you, Catherine Marshall, I want to add, because you keep calling these other groups puppet groups, let me ask you, because people will ask, are you a puppet group of Enbridge? So let me ask you again, does Enbridge fund you to have a campaign against these other groups? Does Enbridge give your organization money?
Look, Evan, I'm not going to respond to conspiracy theories. We're a small grassroots organization.
Why
we don't
is
even have an office.
Evan,
we don't even have an office.
Let me speak.
We have hundreds of Canadian members.
No, but
Our typical
it's not
donor
a conspiracy.
is a Canadian citizen.
If they don't give you money, sorry, just to be fair,
Canadian.
it's not a conspiracy theory. If they don't give you money, you could say they don't. If they do, fine.
I don't respond to conspiracy theories. But look, this is about foreign interests trying to hijack a Canadian process.
I can't get an
Canadian
answer.
People.
I don't know why that's a conspiratory question. If Enbridge funds Ethical Oil, I'd love to know.
This is about foreign interests taking over Canadian decision.
Let's
talk about
John
that.
Bennett, I'll give you one last word here. I mean, we're talking about all things here. John Bennett?
We're talking about protecting the environment. We're talking about protecting the last intact temperate rainforest in the world. That's what this issue is about. We're talking about clean air to breathe, clean water to drink. And for decades and decades, we have participated in those debates, often using some funds that have been donated from the United States.
But
it's
why?
Perfectly legal.
Why can't you rely on Canadians to pay your bills? Why do you have to rely on your foreign special interests?
Because, well, why can't you? I've answered the questions. Why don't you answer Evan's questions? Who's paying you? Who's paying you to be a surrogate for the oil industry? You're not a grassroots organization. You're a surrogate.
I'm a student.
Prove it.
I do this
to answer Evan's question.
All right.
Answer Evan's question.
We didn't get an answer to if Enbridge funds Ethical Oil, although we got some more debate. You can see the passions around this. Catherine and Marshall, I'll give you one last chance. If you don't want to answer, that's fine. I just want to know if they do, if they don't.
But Evan, the question is about foreign interests. We're 100% Canadian. Our regular donor is an average Canadian citizen, and this is about foreign interests and puppet groups who are hijacking the process. And I think it's shocking that John was comparing our oil to heroin. That's an insult to Canadians. No wonder he has to rely on foreigners to pay his bills when he's insulting Canadians like that.
Sierra Club Executive Director John Bennett, Ethical Oil spokesperson Catherine Marshall. Spirited debate today. I appreciate both of you on. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
and that was Evan Solomon conspicuously not asking her to deny it. That's what I would have done. I would have asked her, can you please deny it for us? If you can't, then we'll have to jump to our own conclusions, you know? Like, what do you guys think?
Yeah, that sounds like it would have been a fair question. It's too bad
I think he all but did that essentially there. I mean, it really, I think there was a pretty poor performance on her part, and we haven't seen her in the media as much, at least representing ethical oil to the same extent that she had since that day. I think that was that video incidentally went viral online, and I think really raised some pretty big questions. I think most people did draw their own conclusions from what they saw there. But it's interesting to note that repetition, as you guys were talking about before, and this really comes right out of that Republican machine. I referenced Frank Luntz, the famous Republican pollster that came up with terms like the death tax instead of the estate tax to get that lowered, or invented really the term climate change instead of global warming. And it really relies on polling to find language that works, and then you stick to it relentlessly. And everybody right across the board, whether it's a think tank or a lobby group or your government cronies, all use the same language. And the idea is that if you repeat it loud enough with a big enough megaphone, eventually people will buy into it.
Yeah.
I don't think that's been happening, though, in Canada this time around, fortunately.
Yeah,
I think more people are hearing, but Tony, sorry.
Yeah, I'd like to agree with Damien there. I think belligerence and just like raising the volume level and repetition is a conservative rhetorical technique to silence like anyone that disagrees with them, and if not, make the conversation so distasteful that you just don't want to participate anymore. You know what I mean?
I think she succeeded at that.
Yeah, I found it very difficult to listen to, and it just doesn't make good TV. So, if, you know what I mean? If I was the CBC, and I think if I could make the assertion, I think that CBC very often doesn't want to really go there, and you know.
The thing
one
that
of the things I'll say though. Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, you go ahead.
I've been really quite impressed with the mainstream media, of which I've been very critical, and I publish an alternate media journal, much like yourselves, and so I'm routinely critical of the mainstream media, and remain so today quite often. But the fact of the matter is this Enbridge issue has now landed squarely. In the Western media, it is the story right now. And there are a lot of pundits. For instance, there's a woman named Barbara Yaffe, who's a star editorialist for the Vancouver Sun and the Post Media Network, and she's done a complete flip-flop, a complete reversal from saying how I'm parroting these very same points that we heard here before, and to a couple of weeks ago when this very damning report from the National Transportation Safety Board came out on Enbridge's reaction to their catastrophic spill on the Kalamazoo River in Michigan, and she all declared this project all but dead as a result of that. So there has been a remarkable turnaround, I think, in the mainstream media, and just one of the ways that they're able often to control a story or to kill a story is by simply just not talking about it, and that's not what we're seeing right now. I'm curious, coming from Ontario, to what degree are these topics landing in your press out there? Are you hearing is the Enbridge pipeline, is it, in your impression, is it a national news story at this point?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I would agree too.
Yeah, and I would agree with you wholeheartedly, Damien, that Enbridge is making the news a heck of a lot more than they probably want to right now. But one thing that I would like to throw out there is perhaps this works for the Conservative government, you know what I mean, because they get to stand for jobs, and as far as I can tell, Canadians will always vote for jobs before the environment. And so, as much as we'd like to think that this attention is going to damage the forces that are for this pipeline, I mean, I would be a little bit hesitant to make that call at this point in time. I think the Conservatives might like this attention.
They like to use people like Catherine. What's her last name? Marshall.
Yeah. And
they can hide behind her innocence a little bit too. I think they don't pick somebody like her and look at her faults as complete faults.
Yeah.
She's got her role. So.
Yeah, attractive young girl who's a student and who can repeat the main
married
line.
to Hamish Marshall, former campaign director for Harper, and this is she's a student, she's a law student, she says, but she's a little more than that. But,
yeah, I would imagine so.
On the issue of jobs, though, that Tony mentioned earlier, your other article that initially attracted my attention, which was about the United States military group, Veterans of Foreign Wars, and their interest in jobs up here in Enbridge, or in the Enbridge pipeline in Alberta. And I think you made some excellent points on how he's selling, Harper, that is, how he's selling this issue on jobs, and yet it doesn't seem to be benefiting Canadians. Would you care to talk about your other article?
Absolutely. Well, first of all, a story came out. Well, it was a posting on a jobs website in the States that tries to find jobs for U.S. veterans, as you mentioned, that indicating a huge opportunity for and a deal that they signed with the Edmonton Economic Development Corporation, which is a nonprofit organization under the city of Edmonton, claiming that there were 114,000 jobs to be had in the Alberta tar sands, and particularly around building pipelines, which is absolutely ridiculous, because even Enbridge claims only a few thousand jobs short term for building the pipeline, and after that it's maybe a few dozen to maintain it. But when questioned by a colleague of mine subsequent to my piece, when I broke that story, they claimed it wasn't just about pipeline jobs, but it was oil and gas jobs in general. That would still mean a doubling of the entire oil and gas sector and doubling of employment in Canada. And currently there are only 20,000 direct jobs in the Alberta tar sands, and about 120,000 jobs, or 100,000 jobs in total in Canada. And so the idea that there's all these jobs going to be created there, even oil industry think tanks don't predict those kinds of increases.
Yeah.
Furthermore, we're here seeing an American organization claiming that they're going to provide all these jobs to American veterans. At the same time, we see PetroChina bidding to build the Enbridge pipeline, bringing over their imported labor, taking advantage of these new labor laws that would result in a significant savings for Enbridge in building the pipeline.
Yeah, the new law that you're talking about.
Unprecedented amount.
Yeah, you're talking about the new law that allows companies in Canada to bring in foreign workers and pay them 15% less, whereas
That's
before,
right.
to bring in a foreign worker, you'd have to pay them what you would pay a Canadian. Right, and this should have the effect of driving down wages across the board in Canada, especially for the tar sands. Now, Damien, would you feel comfortable speculating as to why this company is specifically advertising for military veterans?
Well,
if you have to,
I don't really want to speculate on that. I think I'll take it at face value. This is an organization that provides labor or matches up labor or workforce with employment opportunities, but it nevertheless makes me feel a little uneasy in the context of NAFTA, in the context of the security culture that's being built up around this pipeline. We're hearing environmental groups being referred to as eco-terrorists.
Yeah.
We saw a report just recently, brought out by Freedom of Information Search, that showed Greenpeace and other groups being identified by CSIS and other government agencies as a threat, essentially, to national security. And so it does make me a little nervous having a bunch of recently retired American soldiers coming up here to work in the oil sands, or tar sands, or whatever you want to call it.
With the radical and highly demonized environmental movement in this country talking about blockading, not to mention First Nations people talking about blockading the construction, and then all of a sudden we find out that this construction is going to be done by American military veterans